Innocent VII was Sulmanese. Despite good intentions, he did little to end the schism, owing to the troubled state of affairs in Rome and his distrust of the sincerity of Benedict XIII and King Ladislaus of Naples. Chosen only by 8 cardinals, Innocent would be supported by King Ladislaus in putting down riots from the Ghibelline party in Rome. Using his nephew, Ludovico Migliorati, he would murder opposition in their homes, which in turn would cause an uproar in Rome so fierce that he had to flee to Viterbo. After returning to Rome with Ladislaus' aid, Ladislaus would be excommunicated until he accepted the Pope's demands. Disbelieving Benedict XIII's offer to renounce the papacy if Innocent VII followed in suit, the Western Schism would remain. Gregory XII was Venetian. Reigning during the Western Schism, he was opposed by the Avignon claimant Benedict XIII and the Pisan claimants Alexander V and John XXIII. Gregory XII wanted to unify the Church and voluntarily resigned in 1415 to end the schism with the Council of Constance. The rest of the life of the former pope was spent in peaceful obscurity in Ancona. He was the last pope to resign until Benedict XVI did so on the 28th of February 2013, almost 600 years later. Martin V was Roman. His election effectively ended the Western Schism of 1378 to 1417. He is the last pope to date to take on the pontifical name Martin. His reign would see a war against the Hussites in Bohemia and the authorization of crusades against Africa's enslavement of Christians in 1418 and against the Turks in 1420. Eugene IV was Venetian and the nephew of Pope Gregory XII. His tenure was marked by conflict first with the Coloni, relatives of his predecessor Martin V, and later with the Conciliar movement. He excommunicated anyone who enslaved newly converted Christians, the penalty to stand until the captives were restored to their liberty and possessions. In 1443, Eugene decided to take a neutral position on territorial disputes between Portugal and Castile regarding rights claimed along the coast of Africa. He is the last pope to date to take on the pontifical name Eugene. Eugene IV's victory over the Council of Basel and his efforts on behalf of church unity contributed to the breakdown of the conciliar movement and restored the papacy to a semblance of the dominant position it had held before the Western Schism. Eugene was dignified in demeanor, but inexperienced and vacillating in action and excitable in temper. Bitter in his hatred of heresy, he nevertheless displayed great kindness to the poor. He labored to reform the monastic orders, especially the Franciscans, and was never guilty of nepotism. Although austere in his private life, he was a sincere friend of art and learning, and in 1431, he re-established the university at Rome. Eugene died in Rome and was buried at St. Peter's by the tomb of Pope Eugene III. Later, his tomb was transferred to San Salvatore in Lauro, a parish church on the other bank of the Tiber River. Nicholas V was Sarzanese. Pope Eugene made him a cardinal in 1446 after successful trips to Italy and Germany. And when Eugene died the next year, Parentucelli was elected in his place. He took his name Nicholas in memory of his obligations to Niccolo Albergati. The pontificate of Nicholas saw the fall of Constantinople to the Ottoman Turks and the end of the 100 Years' War. He responded by calling a crusade against the Ottomans, which never materialized. By the Concordat of Vienna, he secured the recognition of papal rights over bishoprics and benefices. He also brought about the submission of the last of the anti-popes, Felix V, and the dissolution of the Synod of Basel. A key figure in the Roman Renaissance, Nicholas sought to make Rome the home of literature and art. He strengthened fortifications, restored aqueducts, and rebuilt many churches. He ordered design plans for what would eventually be the Basilica of St. Peter. He would promote the conversion of sub-Saharans by the Portuguese. Calixtus III was Valencian and first pope to come from what is today Spain. Alfonso de Borgia spent his early career as a professor of law at the University of Lleida. He later served as a diplomat for the kings of Aragon. He became a tutor for King Alfonso V's illegitimate son, Ferdinand. After arranging a reconciliation between Alfonso and Pope Martin V, Borgia was made Bishop of Valencia. In 1444, Pope Eugene IV named him a cardinal, and Borgia became a member of the Roman Curia. During the Siege of Belgrade in 1456, Calixtus initiated the custom that bells be rung at midday to remind the faithful to pray for the Crusaders. He was also responsible for the retrial of Joan of Arc that saw her vindicated. He appointed 2 nephews as cardinals, one of whom became Pope Alexander VI. He is the last pope to date to take on the pontifical name Calixtus. The Roman Catholic historian Ludwig Pastor, who would write The History of the Popes, wrote, "Except for his nepotism, Calixtus III deserves high praise, more especially for the energy, constancy, and purpose which he displayed in dealing with the burning question of the day, the protection of Western civilization from the Turkish power. In this matter, he gave a grand example to Christendom, and it is to be observed that in the midst of the military and political interest which claimed so large a share of his time and attention, he did not neglect the internal affairs of the Church and vigorously opposed heresies." Pius II was Senese. He was a Renaissance humanist, famous as an author in Latin before he became Pope. His longest and most enduring work is the story of his life, the Commentaries, which is the only revealed autobiography ever to have been written by a reigning pope. As pope, he would be a supporter of Vlad III Dracula in the Wallachian War against the Turks. His reign would largely consisted of an inability to convince the various kings and rulers of Europe to cease their hostilities with one another and go on crusade against the Ottomans. His sole successes would be seen with a reconciliation of the Holy Roman Emperor and the King of Hungary, as well as the Venetians answering his call to crusade against the Ottomans. Pius would make an attempt of converting the Ottoman Sultan Mehmet II through a letter. If this letter was ever received by the Sultan is unknown, but it is clear that Mehmet did not become a Catholic. Only 2 days after seeing the Venetian fleet off to crusade would Pius succumb to his fever at Ancona. His final resting place is located at St. Andrea della Valle. Paul II was Venetian. When his maternal uncle Eugene IV became Pope, Barbo switched from training to be a merchant to religious studies. His rise in the church was relatively rapid. He built the Palazzo San Marco, now called the Palazzo Venezia, and lived there even as Pope, amassing a great collection of art and antiquities. In his final years, Paul would reject George of Podebrady, the King of Bohemia, because he upheld the conventions of the Council of Basel in favor of the Utraquists. In August 1465, Paul II summoned George before the Roman tribunal. When the king failed to come, Paul allied himself with the insurgents in Bohemia and released the king's subjects from their oath of allegiance. In December 1466, he pronounced the ban of excommunication and sentence of deposition against George. George's apologist, Gregory of Heimburg, subsequently accused Paul of immorality, a move that resulted in Gregory's own excommunication. Just when the king's goodwill disposed the Pope in favor of reconciliation, Paul died suddenly of a heart attack on the 26th of July, 1471. Reports of the death varied. Some claimed he had collapsed from severe indigestion after eating melon in excess, while others said that he had died whilst being sodomized by a page boy. Nevertheless, his death resulted in the creation of a power vacuum in Central Europe, and leading to the Jagiellonian dynasty to dominate much of it. Sixtus IV was Celesi. His accomplishments as Pope included the construction of the Sistine Chapel and the creation of the Vatican archives. A patron of the arts, he brought together the group of artists who ushered the early Renaissance into Rome with the first masterpieces of the city's new artistic age. Sixtus founded the Spanish Inquisition and annulled the decrees of the Council of Constance. He was noted for his nepotism and was personally involved in the infamous Pazzi conspiracy. Before his papal election, Cardinal della Rovere was renowned for his unworldliness and had written learned treatises including On the Blood of Christ and On the Power of God. Some fruitless attempts were made towards unification with the Greek Church. In ecclesiastical affairs, Sixtus promoted the dogma of the Immaculate Conception, which had been confirmed at the Council of Basel in 1439. Sixtus continued a dispute with King Louis XI of France, who upheld the pragmatic sanction of Bourges, which held that papal decrees needed royal assent before they could be promulgated in France. Having fallen ill and unable to sleep for 3 days, Sixtus would die and later be re-entombed in St. Peter's Basilica with his nephew Pope Julius II in front of the monument of Pope Clement X. Innocent VIII was Genoese. Son of the Viceroy of Naples, Battista spent his early years at the Neapolitan court. He became a priest in the retinue of Cardinal Calandrini, half-brother to Pope Nicholas V, Bishop of Savona under Pope Paul II, and with the support of Cardinal Giuliano della Rovere. After intense politicking by della Rovere, Thibaut was elected Pope in 1484. King Ferdinand I of Naples had supported Thibaut's competitor, Rodrigo Borgia. The following year, Pope Innocent supported the barons in their failed revolt. In March 1489, Tem, the captive brother of Bayezid II, the Sultan of the Ottoman Empire, came into Innocent's custody. Viewing his brother as a rival, the Sultan paid Pope Innocent not to set him free. The amount he paid to Pope Innocent was 120,000 crowns, an amount equal to all of the annual revenue to the Vatican, in addition to some holy relics and another sum of money to be paid annually. Anytime the Sultan threatened war against the Christian Balkans, Innocent threatened to release his brother. On the 28th of January 1495, Sem was released by Innocent's successor, Pope Alexander VI, into the custody of King Charles's army, when some weeks later he died of possible poisoning, but more likely pneumonia. Alexander VI was Valencian. Born into the prominent Borgia family in Zativa under the Crown of Aragon, Rodrigo studied law at the University of Bologna. He was ordained deacon and made a cardinal in 1456 after the election of his uncle as Pope Calixtus III, and a year later he became vice-chancellor of the Catholic Church. He proceeded to serve in the Curia under the next 4 popes, acquiring significant influence and wealth in the process. In 1492, Rodrigo was elected pope, taking the name Alexander VI. Alexander's papal bulls of 1493 confirmed or reconfirmed the rights of the Spanish crown in the New World following the finds of Christopher Columbus in 1492. During the Second Italian War, Alexander VI supported his son Cesare Borgia as a condottiero for the French king. The scope of his foreign policy was to gain the most advantageous terms for his family. Alexander is considered one of the most controversial of the Renaissance popes, partly because he acknowledged fathering several children by his mistresses. As a result, his Italianized Valencian surname, Borgia, became a byword for libertinism and nepotism, which are traditionally considered as characterizing his pontificate. On the other hand, 2 of Alexander's successors, Sixtus V and Urban VIII, described him as one of the most outstanding popes since St. Peter.